Let me tell you something obscene, something that will make you very uncomfortable. A report came out this month, December 2025, World Inequality Report 2026, compiled by 200 researchers. Thomas Piketty, the economist, very comprehensive, very careful, very scientific. And here is what they found. 60,000 people, fewer than 60,000 people, control 3 times more wealth than the poorest half of humanity. Let me say this again. 60,000 individuals, not 60,000 families, not 60,000 households. 60,000 people in a world of 8 billion. That is 0.001% of the global population. And these 60,000 people, multimillionaires, billionaires, the type, they control 3 times more wealth than 4 billion human beings combined. 4 billion people, half of humanity, all of their wealth combined, and it equals 1/3 of what 60,000 people have. Now, you might think I am about to give you a moral lecture. This is unjust. This is unfair. We must redistribute wealth. No. That is not my point. My point is much more disturbing. We already know this. This is not news. We have known this for years. The numbers get worse every year. Every report shows the same thing. The gap is widening faster and faster. And we do nothing. Not because we are ignorant, not because we do not care, but because the system has made its own critique impossible. This is what I mean by ideology. This is ideology at its purest. You see, in the old days, ideology worked by hiding. The rich are rich because they work hard. The poor are poor because they are lazy. This is natural. This is how things are. But we do not believe this anymore, do we? Nobody actually believes that 60,000 people work 3 times harder than 4 billion people. Nobody believes this is natural. Nobody believes this is fair. So what is happening? How does the system continue when nobody believes in it? This is the genius of late capitalism. It does not need you to believe. It needs you to accept. It needs you to participate. It needs you to say, yes, this is terrible, but what can I do? And this is precisely where ideology operates today. Not in false belief, but in enforced helplessness. Let me give you the formula. We know the system is broken. We know it is unjust. We know it is unsustainable. But we also know that any alternative is impossible. So we continue. We participate. We complain, yes, but we participate. This is what I call cynical reason, not naive belief, not false consciousness, but conscious participation in a system you know is broken. You read the Inequality Report, you feel outraged. You share it on social media. You write, this is unacceptable in the comments. And then, and this is the crucial part, you go to work, you pay your bills, you invest in your retirement fund, you participate in the exact same economic system that produces this inequality. Not because you are hypocrite, not because you do not care, but because the system has structured your life in such a way that non-participation is impossible. This is the obscene genius of the system. It does not suppress dissent. It absorbs it, it commodifies it, it sells it back to you. You want to fight inequality? Here is a documentary on Netflix. You want to support change? Here is a charity you can donate to, tax deductible, of course. You want revolution? Here is a podcast about it. Here is a TED Talk. Here is a book you can buy on Amazon. Everything is permitted except the one thing that would actually change something, stopping the game entirely. Now, the report, this World Inequality Report, it is very careful, very measured. It does not use revolutionary language. It says things like inequality has reached levels that demand urgent attention. It talks about resilience of economies and stability of democracies. But do you see what is hidden in this language? The admission, the open admission that extreme inequality is incompatible with democracy. Let me read you something. The report says, reducing inequality is not only about fairness, but essential for the resilience of economies, the stability of democracies, and the viability of our planet. Do you see the structure of this sentence? Inequality is not primarily a moral problem. It is a systemic problem. It threatens the stability of democracies. What does this mean? It means if you let 60,000 people control 3 times more wealth than 4 billion people, democracy stops functioning. Not as moral failure, as structural impossibility. And here is the obscene part. We know this. The researchers know this. The policymakers know this. Even the 60,000 people themselves know this. And yet, the system continues. Why? Because the alternative is unthinkable. Not morally unthinkable, structurally unthinkable. Let me give you a concrete example. Small example, but it reveals everything. The report shows that the share of wealth held by the top 0.001% has grown from almost 4% in 1995 to more than 6% today. That is a 50% increase in 30 years. And during this same period, we have had how many? Hundreds of reports, thousands of studies, millions of articles, billions of social media posts, all saying the same thing. This is unsustainable, this is dangerous, this must change. And what happened? It got worse. Not despite the criticism, not despite the awareness. It got worse while everyone was watching, while everyone was documenting it, while everyone was saying it must stop. This is the structure of obscene knowledge. We know, we document, we study, we report, and the thing we are studying, the thing we are criticizing, it continues. It accelerates. Why? Because knowledge without power is not knowledge. It is performance. It is ritual. It is the system acknowledging its own dysfunction while simultaneously proving that this acknowledgement changes nothing. This is what the report calls, and I love this phrase, levels that demand urgent attention. Not levels that will receive urgent attention, levels that demand it. The demand is already built into the analysis. The call to action is already integrated into the report, which means the report itself is part of the system that produces the inequality it describes. I am not saying the researchers are complicit. I am not saying the data is wrong. I am saying something more disturbing. Even accurate, well-intentioned critique has been absorbed into the functioning of the system. The system needs its critics. It needs its reports. It needs its outrage, because this is how it proves it is still functioning, still legitimate, still democratic. Look, the system says we are transparent. We allow research, we publish reports, we acknowledge problems. This is democracy at work, but democracy at work producing what? More inequality, more concentration, more power in fewer hands. And we participate in this performance. We read the reports. We cite the statistics. We express outrage. We demand change. And nothing changes. Or rather, and this is even more obscene, things change in ways that make the problem worse. The report documents this. Since the 1990s, the wealth of billionaires and multimillionaires has grown at approximately 8% annually. Nearly twice the rate of growth experienced by the bottom half of the population. This means the more we talk about inequality, the worse it gets. The more we study it, the more it accelerates. The more we demand change, the more concentrated wealth becomes. This is not coincidence. This is structure. The system has learned to feed on its own critique. You write an article about billionaire wealth, they read it, they adjust their strategies, they optimize their tax avoidance, they increase their wealth. You organize a protest, they study it, they hire the same organizers, they commodify the resistance, they sell revolution as a lifestyle brand. You vote for change, They calibrate the options. They ensure that every viable candidate is compatible with the basic structure. They give you choice without consequence. This is what democracy has become under conditions of extreme inequality: performance of choice, illusion of agency, theater of participation. And the most disturbing part, we know this, we see through it, and we participate anyway. Not because we are stupid, not because we are brainwashed, but because the alternative has been made structurally impossible. Let me be very precise about this. The report shows that in almost every region, the top 1% is wealthier than the bottom 90% combined. Think about this. In almost every country on earth, 1 out of every 100 people has more wealth than the 90 people below them combined. This is not just inequality. This is concentrated power on a scale that makes democracy impossible. Because here is what democracy requires: rough equality of power. Not complete equality, but rough, approximate, close enough that your voice matters, close enough that collective action is possible, close enough that the system must respond to the majority. But when 1% has more than 90%, democracy becomes theater, voting becomes ritual, participation becomes performance. You still have elections, yes. You still have choices, yes. But the choices are all within a range that does not threaten the basic structure. You can vote for lower taxes or higher taxes, but you cannot vote to fundamentally restructure the economy. You can vote for more regulation or less regulation, but you cannot vote to change who owns the capital. You can choose the color of the curtains, but you cannot choose to tear down the house. And this is presented to you as freedom, as democracy, as your right to participate. But it is not participation. It is containment. It is the system giving you just enough agency to make you feel complicit in your own powerlessness. The report documents another obscene fact. The richest 10% of the world own 75% of wealth. The bottom half owns 2%. 2%, half of humanity, 4 billion people, 2% of global wealth, and the other 98% concentrated in the hands of a shrinking elite. Now, you might ask, how is this sustainable? How does this not collapse? And here is the genius. It does not need to be sustainable. It only needs to be maintainable. There is a difference. Sustainable means it can continue indefinitely. Maintainable means it can be held together with force, with surveillance, with propaganda, with the threat of collapse used to justify emergency measures that become permanent. This is what we are living through. Not the sustainability of inequality, but its forced maintenance. The system is not stable. It is stabilized constantly, aggressively, through mechanisms that appear neutral but are deeply political. Financial systems that transfer 1% of global GDP from poor countries to rich countries annually. That is what the report documents, 1% of global GDP every year, flowing from the poorest nations to the wealthiest. This is not trade. This is not investment. This is extraction. This is the global financial system functioning as a mechanism of wealth transfer from the poor to the rich. And we call this the market, we call this globalization, we call this development. But the report is very clear, this is rentierism. Wealthy countries borrow cheaply, invest abroad for high returns, and extract wealth from poorer nations through debt servicing and financial returns, and the poorest nations cannot exit this system, not because they do not want to, but because the system is structured such that exit means collapse. This is not conspiracy, this is structure. This is how the system works, openly, transparently, with full documentation. The World Bank documents it. The IMF documents it, the inequality reports document it. Everyone knows, everyone sees, everyone acknowledges, and it continues. Why? Because the system has made alternatives structurally impossible. You want to exit the global financial system? Fine. Your currency collapses, your economy implodes, your people starve. You want to redistribute wealth? Fine, capital flight, investment stops, jobs disappear. You want to regulate the rich? Fine. They move, they relocate, they restructure. The system has created a situation where every move against it triggers consequences that justify its continuation. This is the ultimate ideological trap. Not there is no alternative, but every alternative is worse. Not this is the best system, but any change will cause collapse. Not, and so we continue, we maintain, we manage the crisis without ever resolving it. The report calls this situation no longer sustainable, but I call it something else, permanent in unsustainable. Unsustainability is the new normal. Crisis as management strategy. Emergency as permanent condition. This is where we are. This is what 60,000 people owning your future looks like. Not dramatic collapse, not revolutionary uprising, just this slow, grinding, managed decline of democracy into oligarchy, of citizenship into spectatorship, of participation into performance. And the most obscene thing, the most disturbing thing, we will probably do nothing. Not because we do not know, not because we do not care, but because the system has structured the world such that knowing and caring are not enough. You need power. And power is precisely what has been concentrated into those 60,000 hands. This is the lesson of the Inequality Report. Not that we are unequal, we knew that, but that inequality has reached a threshold where democracy itself becomes impossible. And we are living through this impossibility right now. Today, not as dramatic event, but as everyday reality. Elections that change nothing, protests that are absorbed, reforms that make things worse. This is the world 60,000 people have built, not through conspiracy, through structure, through systems, through the normal functioning of capitalism at the global scale. And we participate every day, not because we endorse it, but because non-participation has been made impossible. This is ideology at its purest, not false belief, but enforced complicity, not ignorance, but cynical knowledge that changes nothing. So when you read the next inequality report, and there will be another one, and the numbers will be worse, do not ask, how can this be? Ask instead, how is this still possible? How is it possible that we know, we document, we critique, and nothing changes? The answer is simple and terrible, because the system has learned to survive its own critique. It has learned to feed on its own contradictions. It has learned to use transparency as a tool of legitimation. We are not living in the age of hidden inequality. We are living in the age of visible, documented, undeniable inequality that continues anyway. This is the obscene truth that 60,000 people understand perfectly and 4 billion people are only beginning to realize. And by the time we fully realize it, by the time we fully understand the trap we are in, it will be too late. Or perhaps, and this is the most disturbing possibility, it is already too late. And what we call politics now is just the performance of possibility in a system where possibility has been structurally eliminated. This is what those 60,000 people have bought with their wealth. Not just luxury, not just power, but the ability to make alternatives unthinkable, to make change impossible, to make democracy itself a performance with no consequence. And we will probably let them keep it, not because we chose to, but because choosing otherwise has been made impossible. This is the lesson. This is the horror. This is the world we live in.